It was difficult, but I was up there and immersed among people who all needed subtitles.
Hollywood wanted nothing to do with it. Critics called it career suicide. Studios laughed him out of boardrooms. But Mel Gibson didn't care, because what he was about to create would shake the foundations of cinema itself, and the cost would be higher than anyone imagined. This is the story of how one man's spiritual crisis became the most controversial film in modern history. How a production plagued by inexplicable phenomena transformed everyone who touched it, and how the aftermath nearly destroyed the very man who brought it to life. What you're about to discover goes beyond the cameras, beyond the headlines. This is what Mel Gibson finally revealed about the forces that collided on that set.
And believe me, I did a lot of research on it. And according to all the research, it was way worse than anything I showed.
And the price he paid for telling the story Hollywood never wanted told. Stay until the end, because 2 decades later, Gibson is returning to finish what he started. And what he's planning will eclipse everything that came before. The breaking point. The year was 2000, and Mel Gibson stood at the pinnacle of Hollywood power. He had conquered the box office, won Academy Awards, and commanded respect from every corner of the industry. Directors wanted him, studios needed him, audiences worshipped him, but inside, he was dying. Gibson's personal life had become a war zone. His marriage hung by threads. Alcohol flowed like water through his days. The fame that others craved had become his prison, and the applause of millions couldn't silence the void screaming inside his chest. He would later admit in raw confessions that suicide crossed his mind more than once. The man everyone envied was collapsing under the weight of emptiness. Success had given him everything except the one thing he desperately needed: meaning. Then came the night everything shifted. Gibson, drunk and desperate, found himself on his knees in a darkness so thick he could barely breathe. He hadn't prayed, truly prayed, in decades. His father had raised him in a strict Catholic household, but Hollywood had stripped all that away years ago. Faith had become a distant memory, something for other people, weaker people. But that night, broken and alone, he reached for the only thing left. A Bible sat on his shelf, dusty and forgotten. He opened it without thinking, and his eyes fell on the passages describing Christ's final hours. The beatings, the mockery, the nails. And something cracked open inside him. For weeks, he couldn't stop reading. The gospel accounts consumed him. He studied every detail of the crucifixion, cross-referenced historical texts, devoured the visions of mystics who had described Christ's suffering in unbearable detail. And slowly, through the blood and pain on those ancient pages, Gibson found what he'd been searching for. Not comfort, not peace, but purpose. He understood then that his own sins, his pride, his rage, his self-destruction had put those nails in Christ's hands. And if that was true, if his brokenness had contributed to that suffering, then he owed a debt that could only be paid one way: by showing the world exactly what happened. Gibson made a decision that would change everything. He would make a film unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. No sanitized version, no comfortable distance. He would force audiences to witness every lash, every thorn, every drop of blood, not as entertainment, as testimony. The impossible vision. When Mel Gibson walked into studio meetings with his pitch,
Well, the institution, it was instituted by Christ, but that doesn't mean that it can't be flawed. And there's a school of thought that says,
executives listened politely at first. Mel Gibson wanted to make a movie. Of course they were interested. But then he explained what kind of movie. A film about Jesus Christ's crucifixion. Shot in dead languages nobody spoke anymore. No subtitles, or maybe subtitles, he hadn't decided. Extreme violence from beginning to end. No Hollywood actors, no compromises. The rooms went silent. Then came the rejections. Not polite passes, outright refusals. Executives told him directly, "This will be the biggest disaster in film history." Some laughed in his face. Others tried to negotiate, suggesting he soften the violence, add some English dialogue, cast a recognizable star, anything to make it marketable. Gibson refused every suggestion. What the studios didn't understand was that Gibson wasn't pitching a movie. He was describing a mission. This wasn't about box office returns or award campaigns. This was spiritual warfare, and he knew the moment he compromised, the whole thing would collapse into just another Hollywood product. So he made a choice that stunned the industry. He would finance it entirely himself. No studio backing, no distributor guarantees, no safety net whatsoever. Gibson liquidated assets, sold properties, and poured $45 million of his own fortune into the production. If it failed, he would lose everything. His wealth, his reputation, his career. But he had already lost everything that mattered. Now he was fighting to get it back. The film would be titled simply The Passion of the Christ, and Gibson would direct it with the same ferocity he brought to Braveheart's battle scenes. Except this time, the battle was for something far more eternal. Hollywood watched in disbelief as Gibson assembled his cast and crew. No major names, no publicity machine, just the obsessed director, a handful of committed actors, and a vision that seemed designed to fail. What none of them knew was that failure would be the least of their concerns. Because the moment cameras started rolling, something began happening that nobody could explain. Casting the Savior. Finding someone to play Jesus Christ seemed impossible from the start. Gibson understood that this role would break whoever took it, not just physically, though the physical demands would be extreme, but spiritually, emotionally. This wasn't a part you could research in method acting classes. This required someone willing to suffer. Gibson met with established actors, but every conversation felt wrong. Too polished, too aware of themselves, too Hollywood. He needed someone the audience wouldn't recognize, someone who could disappear into the role completely. Then, someone mentioned Jim Caviezel. Caviezel was a rising talent, known for serious dramatic work, but not yet a household name. More importantly, he was a devout Catholic who took his faith seriously in an industry that mocked such things. Gibson invited him to his home. What was supposed to be a brief introduction turned into an hours-long conversation about faith, suffering, and what it means to carry a cross. Then Gibson issued his warning. If you do this, Hollywood will blacklist you. Your career will be over. You'll be marked. Caviezel sat quietly. Then he responded with words that gave Gibson chills. We all have our crosses. The question is whether we carry them or get crushed beneath them. In that moment, Gibson knew he'd found his Jesus. But then Caviezel mentioned something that made the room go cold. I just turned 33 years old, the traditional age of Christ at the crucifixion. Gibson stared at him. When's your birthday? September 26th. What year? 1968. The math was exact. Caviezel was 33, the same age. Then, almost as an afterthought, Caviezel added, and my initials are J.C. James Caviezel, Jesus Christ. Gibson would later describe that moment as the first sign that something beyond human planning was guiding this production. It was too perfect, too aligned, too impossible to be coincidence. From that day forward, both men understood they weren't just making a movie. They were being called to something. Caviezel began preparing immediately. Daily Mass, hours of prayer, scripture meditation. He studied the Gospels until he could recite them from memory. He fasted. He prayed in the middle of the night. He wasn't preparing for a performance. He was preparing for a sacrifice. And the sacrifice was coming. When heaven and hell collided, production began in Matera, Italy, a region known for its ancient caves and biblical landscape. Gibson chose it because the terrain looked exactly like first-century Jerusalem. But from the first day of filming, the atmosphere felt different. The weather changed without warning. Crew members described sudden shifts from bright sunshine to dark, churning clouds in minutes. Winds appeared from nowhere, tearing through equipment and scattering props across the hillside. At first, everyone dismissed it as bad luck. Italian weather, mountain climate, nothing supernatural. Then, the lightning came. They were filming the Sermon on the Mount, one of the few scenes showing Jesus before his arrest. Caviezel stood on a hill, arms outstretched, speaking words of blessing to the gathered crowd below. The sky had been clear moments before, but suddenly, darkness rolled over the set like a wave. The temperature dropped. The air grew thick, electric. Then a bolt of lightning split the sky and struck Jim Caviezel directly. The explosion of light engulfed him completely. The sound was deafening. Cameras went dead. People screamed. For a frozen moment, Caviezel stood there, surrounded by crackling energy, his hair standing on end. Then silence. He was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. No burns, no injuries, just the smell of ozone and the stunned realization that he should be dead. The assistant director, John Michelini, ran up the hill to check on him. And as he reached Caviezel's side, another bolt struck the exact same spot. 2 lightning strikes, same location, less than 60 seconds apart. Both men survived. The odds of that happening were astronomically small. Lightning rarely strikes the same place twice, and almost never within seconds. People don't survive direct strikes like that. Yet both men walked away. The crew stood frozen in shock. Some openly wept, others prayed. And from that moment, everything changed on set. Before each day's filming, the crew began gathering for prayer. Catholics, atheists, agnostics, it didn't matter, everyone bowed their heads, because everyone understood they were no longer making just a film. They were in the middle of something beyond their control. The scourging becomes real. The time arrived to film the flogging scene, the moment where Roman soldiers tear Jesus' flesh apart with whips. Gibson had studied historical accounts extensively. Roman scourging wasn't symbolic punishment. It was calculated torture, designed to bring victims to the edge of death without killing them. He wanted that reality captured on film. To protect Caviezel, the crew constructed a protective board he could wear under his costume. The whips were designed to look brutal, but hit the board harmlessly. Everything was choreographed, controlled, safe, except it wasn't. During the first take, one of the actors playing a Roman soldier swung too hard. The whip's trajectory went wrong. The metal tip curved around the protective board and buried itself directly into Caviezel's back. His scream was real, not acting, pure pain. The crew rushed to stop filming, but Caviezel insisted they continue. He wanted that moment captured, that split second of genuine agony, because that's what Jesus felt. Then it happened again. Another strike went wild. Another piece of metal tore into his flesh, opening a wound over 14 inches long. The blood on screen wasn't all makeup. Some of it was Caviezel's own. Medical staff treated him, tried to convince him to stop, but he refused. They filmed take after take, and every lash, every cry, every moment of suffering was real. Gibson watched from behind the monitor, tears streaming down his face. He had asked for authenticity. Now he was getting it, and the cost was becoming unbearable. But Caviezel never complained, not once, because he understood something the rest of them were only beginning to grasp. The suffering wasn't random. It was necessary, and it was transforming everyone who witnessed it. Carrying the cross. The crucifixion sequence required Caviezel to carry an actual wooden cross through the streets. Gibson refused to use lightweight props or camera tricks. He wanted the burden to be real. The cross weighed over 150 pounds. Caviezel lifted it onto his shoulders and began walking. The cameras rolled. He took 3 steps and stumbled. The plan was for a stunt coordinator to catch the cross before it landed on him. The coordinator missed. The full weight of the beam crashed down onto Caviezel's head, splitting his skull open. Blood poured down his face. His shoulder dislocated from the impact. The pain was immediate, overwhelming, total. Medics swarmed around him, screaming for someone to call for an ambulance. But Caviezel, half conscious and bleeding, grabbed the cross and pulled himself back up. "Keep filming!" he gasped. Gibson didn't stop the cameras. He understood what Caviezel was doing. This wasn't acting anymore. This was willing participation in the suffering he was portraying. For the rest of the scene, Caviezel walked with his shoulder visibly out of place, tears of pain mixing with fake blood, his body trembling from shock. When they finally cut, the medics confirmed the dislocation and urged him to take weeks off for recovery. Caviezel was back on set the next morning, hypothermia and pneumonia. The crucifixion scenes were filmed during winter. Caviezel hung on the cross for hours at a time, wearing only a loincloth, exposed to freezing rain and bitter wind. His body temperature dropped dangerously low. His lips turned blue. His breathing became shallow. Medics diagnosed hypothermia and begged Gibson to postpone filming. Caviezel refused to come down. "Christ didn't come down from the cross," he said through chattering teeth. "Neither will I." Days stretched into weeks. The exposure weakened his immune system. He developed pneumonia in both lungs. His body was failing, but his resolve never wavered. The makeup artists spent hours each day covering him in prosthetic wounds and artificial blood. To save time, Caviezel began sleeping in the makeup. His skin developed rashes and infections from the chemicals, but he endured it without complaint. Gibson watched his lead actor slowly destroying himself and faced an impossible choice. Stop filming and protect Caviezel's health, or continue and capture something true. He chose truth. Years later, Gibson would confess, "I watched that man suffer, truly suffer, and I realized he was giving me something I could never direct. He was giving me witness." The line between performance and reality had vanished completely. What appeared on screen wasn't special effects or movie magic. It was one man's voluntary participation in agony, and everyone who watched the dailies felt it. Unseen presences. Strange reports began circulating among the crew. People claimed they saw figures on set that weren't part of the production. Men in white robes who appeared during filming offered quiet guidance about lighting or camera angles, then vanished. At first, it seemed like confusion. Large productions have dozens of people moving around constantly. But the descriptions were too consistent. Multiple crew members, who didn't know each other and worked different shifts, reported the same thing. Calm men with authoritative presence, who gave specific technical advice, then disappeared without anyone learning their names. When production managers reviewed the personnel lists, those men weren't on any official records. No one had hired them. No one had signed their paperwork. They simply appeared, helped, and vanished. The cinematographer swore that while filming Caviezel on the cross, he saw a glowing figure standing behind him in the frame. When he checked the footage later, nothing appeared. Some crew members dismissed it as exhaustion or mass hysteria. Others insisted they knew what they saw. Gibson himself acknowledged that unexplainable things happened throughout production. "There were moments," he said, "where I felt we weren't alone on that set. Something was there with us. I don't know what to call it. Grace, maybe, or angels, but it was there." The atmosphere grew so intense that people began volunteering to confess or pray before filming scenes. Atheist crew members started carrying rosaries. Arguments and conflicts that normally plague film sets simply didn't happen. It was as if the story being told had sanctified the space around it. Conversions on set. Luca Lionello arrived on set to play Judas Iscariot. He was a professional actor, trained and experienced, and he openly identified as an atheist. Religion meant nothing to him. This was just another role, another paycheck. But something happened during filming that he couldn't explain. Every day, he portrayed the man who betrayed Jesus. He delivered him to the authorities. He watched him suffer. He saw the consequences of his character's choices played out in brutal detail. And slowly, something inside him broke open. After filming wrapped, Lionello couldn't stop thinking about the story. Not as mythology, not as ancient history, but as truth. The figure of Jesus haunted him. The idea of divine love and forgiveness consumed his thoughts. Within months, he converted to Christianity. He was baptized along with his entire family, and he later wrote that playing Judas showed him what he had been his whole life. Lost, betrayed by his own choices, desperate for redemption he didn't believe existed, until he saw it with his own eyes. Pietro Cerubi played Barabbas, the criminal released in Jesus' place. His role was brief, almost without dialogue, just a few moments on screen exchanging glances with Caviezel, while the crowd screamed for Christ's death. But when their eyes met during filming, Cerubi later described experiencing something he couldn't rationalize. "I didn't see an actor," he said. "I saw someone looking at me with complete forgiveness, and it destroyed me." He couldn't sleep for weeks. He couldn't explain what happened, but he knew his life had changed. He embraced Christianity, was baptized, and spent years traveling to share his testimony. Even Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary, the mother of Jesus, carried a secret during filming. She was pregnant, though she told no one on set. Years later, she revealed that her condition gave her something no amount of acting could replicate: a mother's instinct to protect her child, even as she watched him die. And when Gibson learned her last name meant Morning Star in German, an ancient title for the Virgin Mary, he understood once again that the casting had been guided by something beyond human planning. The face of evil, one of the film's most disturbing elements, was Gibson's portrayal of Satan. He cast Rosalinda Celentano specifically for her androgynous features, wanting a figure that was neither fully male nor female, something alien and wrong. They shaved her eyebrows, drained color from her skin, and overlaid her voice with masculine tones. She lost weight dramatically and filmed her scenes in slow motion to prevent blinking, creating an inhuman quality. In the most unsettling scene, Satan appears in the crowd during Jesus' scourging, holding a baby. But the infant has the face of an old man, a grotesque mockery of motherhood and innocence. Gibson intended it as a dark mirror of Mary and Jesus. Corrupted love, twisted creation, hell celebrating what it believed was heaven's defeat. Celentano later described the experience as emotionally devastating. "I felt something dark during those scenes," she confessed. "The air changed. I can't explain it, but it felt real." She withdrew from acting after the film, spending years in isolation, painting and recovering from whatever she had touched during that performance. Meanwhile, Caviezel's transformation was complete. He barely spoke between takes. His eyes carried a weight that unsettled people. Some said he wasn't acting anymore. He had become something else entirely. When they finally filmed the resurrection scene, the atmosphere lifted. Crew members who had been crying for weeks suddenly felt inexplicable hope. The light entering the tomb seemed brighter than the stage lights could account for. And when Gibson called "cut" for the final time, the silence that followed didn't feel like the end of a movie. It felt like the end of a pilgrimage. People embraced, others wept. Many couldn't find words, because everyone understood they had witnessed something that transcended filmmaking. The premiere that shook the world. Mel Gibson returned to Los Angeles carrying a finished film no one wanted to distribute. The major studios, having rejected it during development, now refused to market it. They predicted disaster. Gibson didn't wait for their approval. He financed distribution himself, pouring another $15 million into getting the film into theaters. He bypassed Hollywood entirely and went straight to churches. He screened the film in parishes, Christian schools, and community centers. He let the faithful see it first, trusting them to spread the word. And they did. On February 25th, 2004, Ash Wednesday, The Passion of the Christ opened in theaters nationwide. There was no red carpet premiere, no celebrity press tour, no massive marketing campaign, just lines stretching around entire city blocks. People arrived carrying rosaries and Bibles. They prayed in the parking lots. Inside the theaters, the The silence was profound. And when the credits rolled, thousands sat frozen in their seats, unable to move, unable to speak. Reports flooded in from across the country, people fainting during the scourging scenes, heart attacks, mass conversions, spontaneous prayers erupting in theater aisles. In Kansas, a woman died of a heart attack during the crucifixion scene on opening night. The tragedy made headlines, but it didn't slow the crowds. If anything, it reinforced what audiences already felt. This film carried power beyond entertainment. Churches organized group viewings. Entire congregations bought out screenings. The Christian community mobilized unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Within days, The Passion became a global phenomenon. It earned over $370 million domestically and $612 million worldwide. It became the highest-grossing R-rated film in American history and the highest-grossing non-English language film ever made. A movie spoken in dead languages, with no stars, no studio backing, and universal critical condemnation, had conquered the box office. Gibson had been right all along. There was an audience Hollywood had ignored, the faithful, and they were waiting for someone to tell their story without shame or apology. But Gibson's vindication would be short-lived. The media crucifixion, the moment. The Passion became a cultural phenomenon. The backlash began. It started with critics, escalated to accusations, and became a full-scale media assault. Major newspapers called Gibson an anti-Semite. Academics accused him of promoting medieval blood libel. Talk shows debated whether the film incited hatred against Jews. The attacks were relentless. The New York Times, The Guardian, and dozens of other publications published scathing editorials questioning Gibson's motives, his faith, and his sanity. Some called him a fanatic. Others labeled him dangerous. Hollywood, which had rejected the film initially, now used its success to paint Gibson as a threat to social harmony. The accusations centered on his portrayal of Jewish authorities in the crucifixion. Critics argued he was blaming Jews for Christ's death, reviving ancient prejudices that had fueled centuries of persecution. Gibson responded calmly in interviews. Jesus was Jewish. His mother was Jewish. His disciples were Jewish. How could I be anti-Semitic against his own people? This isn't about blame. It's about redemption. He explained that he showed the pain unfiltered because Christ's suffering wasn't metaphorical. It was real. I didn't make it brutal to shock people. I made it brutal because that's what happened. And if Christ endured that out of love, the least I could do was not sanitize it. But Hollywood wasn't interested in explanations. The industry that had celebrated Gibson for decades now treated him like an enemy. Award ceremonies ignored the film, despite its unprecedented success. Former friends stopped returning his calls. Projects he was attached to suddenly collapsed. Then came the night that destroyed everything. The Fall. 2 years after The Passion premiered, Mel Gibson was arrested for drunk driving in Malibu. During the arrest, he unleashed a torrent of anti-Semitic slurs that were captured in the police report and immediately leaked to the press. The words were indefensible, vile, hateful. Within hours, Gibson's face was on every news channel worldwide. The man who had claimed he wasn't anti-Semitic had just proven his critics right in the most public way imaginable. Hollywood canceled him instantly. Not quietly, not privately. They made an example of him. Gibson issued apologies, entered rehab, begged for forgiveness, but the damage was irreversible. He had given his enemies everything they needed to justify their condemnation. For the next decade, Gibson disappeared from public life. His marriage collapsed. His career evaporated. He faced lawsuits, public humiliation, and complete isolation from the industry he had once dominated. In later interviews, he confessed he contemplated suicide during those dark years. I felt like I'd destroyed everything. Not just my career. Everything I'd tried to build with The Passion. I'd betrayed it all. The man who had survived lightning strikes, who had poured his fortune and soul into telling Christ's story, was now broken by his own demons. But in the depths of that darkness, Gibson found something unexpected: clarity. The long road back. While Mel Gibson disappeared from Hollywood, Jim Caviezel faced his own exile. After The Passion made him internationally recognizable, his phone stopped ringing. Agents dropped him. Scripts dried up. Directors who had pursued him before now refused to meet with him. Playing Jesus Christ had marked him as untouchable. In a 2011 interview, Caviezel confirmed what everyone suspected. "They told me my career was finished. And they were right. But I'd do it again without hesitation." For years, he survived on small roles and television work. The blacklist was real and comprehensive. Hollywood had decided that being associated with Gibson's controversial film was career poison. Instead of fighting it, Caviezel leaned into his faith. He traveled the world giving talks about suffering, redemption, and hope. He adopted 3 special needs children from China and raised them away from the spotlight. He accepted his exile as the cost of obedience. Then, in 2011, something shifted. He was cast as the lead in Person of Interest, a network television series that ran for 5 successful seasons. It wasn't a comeback, it was survival. The true resurrection came in 2023. Caviezel starred in Sound of Freedom, an independent film about fighting child trafficking that every major studio refused to distribute. Christian communities rallied behind it, shared it on social media, and turned it into a grassroots phenomenon. It earned over $250 million worldwide, surpassing Disney blockbusters and proving once again that Hollywood had miscalculated the faith audience. Caviezel returned to prominence the same way he'd left, through a controversial film that defied industry expectations. When asked how it felt, he simply said, "God doesn't waste suffering. He was preparing me for this." Meanwhile, Mel Gibson was experiencing his own resurrection. But his return wasn't about redemption in Hollywood's eyes. It was about finishing what he started 20 years earlier. The Resurrection Promise. Gibson never stopped thinking about the sequel. Even during his darkest years, he worked on the script in secret with his brother and screenwriter Randall Wallace. He called it The Resurrection of the Christ. But this wouldn't be a simple continuation. Gibson envisioned something that had never been attempted in cinema. A full exploration of what happened between Christ's death and his return. Not just the moment the stone rolled away, but the 3 days in between, the descent into Hades, the confrontation with death itself, the cosmic battle for every soul that ever lived. In interviews, Gibson described it as the greatest event in human history. We know suffering. Few understand what happened after. Christ didn't just come back to life. He destroyed death at its source. He spent years researching apocryphal texts, patristic writings, and theological interpretations of Christ's descent to the dead. He wanted to show the moment when the Son of God invaded hell itself and shattered its gates. This isn't just about the empty tomb, Gibson explained. It's about power. The first film showed how much Christ loved us. This one will show how far that love reached. The project remained in development for years, delayed by Gibson's personal struggles and Hollywood's continued hostility. But he never abandoned it. Then, in 2020, he announced filming would begin. The pandemic delayed production, but Gibson used the time to refine his vision. He returned to Matera, Italy, where he filmed the original. He assembled theologians and historians to ensure accuracy. He designed sequences depicting the afterlife using imagery from Revelation and the Psalms. And he made a controversial decision. He wouldn't bring back the original cast. A new face for Christ fans had assumed Jim Caviezel would reprise his role. Caviezel himself confirmed in interviews that he was prepared to return. The partnership between actor and director seemed destined to continue. But in 2025, Gibson announced he was recasting the role. His reasoning was both artistic and spiritual. Each generation needs to see Christ with fresh eyes, he explained. This isn't a sequel in the traditional sense. It's the second part of one complete story, and it demands something new. The lead role went to Finnish actor Jasper Pakkanen, joined by Maya Morgenstern returning as Mary, alongside new cast members in other key roles. The budget exceeded $100 million, more than double the original film's cost. But Gibson wasn't concerned with finances. He had already proven that betting on faith could produce miracles. The plot will span from Christ's burial to his ascension, including his appearances to the disciples and the moment he returns to the Father. But the centerpiece will be the descent into Hades, a realm depicted through theological vision and artistic imagination. "I'm not just showing what the resurrection looked like," Gibson said. "I'm showing why it matters. Not for Christ's sake, for ours." Gibson has kept most details secret, but he revealed that the film will include a sequence inspired by revelation, a vision of the afterlife that he claims no one will ever forget. And in a move that stunned even his supporters, he announced the film will be released in 2 parts, separated by 40 days. Part 1 premieres March 26, 2027, Good Friday. Part 2 premieres May 6, 2027, Ascension Day, exactly 40 days apart. The same span Christ remained on earth after rising. Gibson insists the timing isn't a marketing strategy. This is liturgy, not business. "I want people to live between the resurrection and the ascension the way the apostles did. In wonder, in confusion, in hope." Hollywood learns. Too late. After The Passion became the highest-grossing R-rated film in history, Hollywood suddenly noticed the Christian audience they had ignored for decades. Studios commissioned studies. They discovered that millions of believers were hungry for authentic, faith-based content. They saw an untapped market worth billions, so they did what Hollywood always does. They tried to manufacture it. Films like God's Not Dead, War Room, Heaven is for Real, and dozens of others flooded theaters. Some succeeded financially. None came close to matching The Passion's cultural impact, because Hollywood had misunderstood the lesson. The faithful don't want comfortable movies that affirm what they already believe. They want truth. They want films that challenge them, confront them, cost something to watch. The Passion succeeded because it was made by a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. It was born from genuine spiritual crisis, not market research. Gibson didn't make that film to capture an audience. He made it to save his own soul. And audiences recognized the difference. Polls revealed that 10% of viewers changed aspects of their faith after watching The Passion. Another 18% began praying more or attending church regularly. Those numbers represented millions of people whose lives were altered by one film. Psychologists studied the phenomenon. They called it collective catharsis, a shared emotional and spiritual experience that transcended entertainment. But the testimonies went beyond psychology. Miracles in the theater. Thousands of people worldwide reported impossible experiences while watching The Passion of the Christ. Healings, visions, instant conversions, encounters they couldn't explain. Some claimed they felt a physical presence in the theater during certain scenes. Others described overwhelming peace that lasted days afterward. Many couldn't stop crying without understanding why. A woman in Argentina said her vision partially restored after watching the film. A man in the Philippines claimed God spoke to him during the scourging. An addict in Italy abandoned drugs immediately after leaving the theater. In Brazil, a priest organized a community screening. During the crucifixion, people spontaneously began confessing their sins aloud, weeping, asking for forgiveness from each other. The stories multiplied, forums filled with testimonies, books documented conversions. People who hadn't prayed in decades found themselves on their knees after watching. Were they all true? Some dismissed them as emotional manipulation or mass hysteria, but the sheer volume of consistent reports suggested something deeper. Gibson himself admitted he never expected this level of spiritual response. "I just wanted to tell the truth," he said. "Everything else that happened, that was beyond me." For millions of believers, the Passion stopped being entertainment and became a tool of transformation. And now, 20 years later, Gibson is preparing to complete the story. The Return, Mel Gibson, is 70 years old now. His face shows the years of struggle, but his eyes carry the same intensity they held when he first decided to make The Passion. In recent interviews, he speaks differently than the broken man who fell in 2006. There's humility there and hard-won wisdom. "I destroyed a lot," he admits. "I hurt people. I proved my critics right about some things. But I also learned that God doesn't abandon you when you fail. He waits." Gibson's return to filmmaking hasn't been triumphant. He's directed several films since his fall. Hacksaw Ridge earned him an Oscar nomination, proving he still had talent. But he's never fully returned to Hollywood's graces. And he doesn't seem to care. Because he's not making The Resurrection for Hollywood. He's making it for the same reason he made the first film. Because he has to. "This isn't about career redemption," he explained. "It's about finishing what I started. I showed the world Christ's death. Now I need to show them his victory." When asked if he fears another backlash, Gibson laughed. "I've already lost everything once. There's freedom in that. I'm not trying to please anyone, except the one who gave me this story in the first place." Production is underway. The cast is assembled. The locations are prepared. And Gibson is directing with the same obsessive detail that marked the original. But this time, he's not alone in the wilderness. This time, millions of people are waiting. What's coming? Gibson has been cryptic about specific details, but he's dropped hints about what the resurrection will contain. The film will open in darkness, the tomb sealed, the apostles scattered, hope seemingly dead. It will show Mary Magdalene discovering the empty grave, the disciples' confusion, the guards' terror,